Okay, so guys, yesterday I came across this really interesting video, and it's a Lex Friedman interview of this guy named Bill Ackman. I didn't know anything about Bill Ackman. I thought he was probably some sort of hedge fund or venture capital guy. And the first hour was really interesting, business related, but then it took a turn that I wasn't expecting at all. I was playing League of Legends as I was listening to this, and it took a really astonishing turn. This guy went to Harvard, and Lex brought up the controversy of the Harvard president getting fired and why she was fired. And then this guy revealed some details that I'm going to analyze here that I haven't heard anywhere else, essentially confirming the hypotheses that I derived and listed in my videos analyzing the testimony before Congress of those university professors. I have family at Harvard, I have family at MIT, so these environments are important to me. But there are several different moments here that happen over the course of like an hour and a half that I'm going to pick apart and edit together for you so that we can really understand what's going on here.
Take me through the saga of university presidents testifying on this topic. Protests on college campuses, protests that call for the genocide of Jewish people, and the university presidents.
So it begins on October 8th. $82,000 a year, which itself is crazy to go to Harvard. But imagine your family borrows the money, or you borrow the money as a student, and your learning is disrupted by constant protest, and the university does nothing. When George Floyd died, the Harvard president wrote a very strong letter denouncing what had taken place. And
over one man, one instance. Now compare that with this act of genocide.
Calling this an important moment in American history, and took it incredibly seriously. Her first letter about October 7th was not that. And then her second letter was not that. And then ultimately she was sort of forced by the board or
there's a lot of inside information here that no one's even heard about.
Pressure to make a more public statement. But it was clear that it was hard for her to come to an understanding of this terrorist act. And then the protests erupted on campus. And they started out reasonably benign. And then protesters got more and more aggressive in terms of violating university rules on things like bullying.
That's because there is an inflamed positive feedback loop that happens in the leftist mind. First of all, they're claiming counterfeit virtue. They're saying that they're good people as a result of being on the right team. Of course, the right team is not vetted by logic or reason or rationality, but that doesn't matter to them. They insist that they're good people as a result of being on the right team. And so when you fail to acknowledge that, you are not only failing to acknowledge the entire system, you're calling them frauds in a deep sense. And nothing enrages a leftist more deeply than being called a fraud.
And the university did nothing. And, I went up to campus and I met with hundreds of students in small groups and larger groups. And they're like, Bill, why is the president doing nothing? Why is the administration doing nothing? And that was really the beginning.
It seems mysterious until you connect it to the architecture of the left, which I talked about in that video, analyzing testimony before Congress. I was able to see it just in the testimony that they gave, the architecture to why their answers were so petulant and immoral, as well as disconnected from reality.
I reached out to the president, reached out to the board of Harvard.
He's actually able to reach out to the president. He reached out to the woman that was fired.
I said, look, this thing is heading in the wrong direction. You need to fix it. And I have some ideas. Love to share.
White man, billionaire, telling a black woman what to do and that she's making a mistake. I'm just breaking this down in terms of how the radical left views that. You can tell that they would instantaneously be enraged, and as soon as she receives that email, she's infuriated that she's being judged, and she's infuriated that the hierarchy that the radical left creates to establish victimhood competitions is being violated.
I got the Heisman, as they say. They just kept pushing off the opportunity for me to meet with the president, meet with the board.
Imagine a president of a university, even an elite university, refusing to meet with a billionaire even for 10 minutes. The narcissism's insane.
And in fact, the open dialogue I had with a couple of people on the board basically got shut down after that. The president was called to testify along with two other, the president of MIT, the president of University of Pennsylvania, and we're having similar issues on campus. I reached out to the president of Harvard and said, well, one, the Israeli government had gotten in touch and offered the opportunity for me to see the Hamas GoPro film. And I said, what, I'd love to show it at Harvard. And they thought that would be a great idea. And so I partnered with the head of Harvard Chabad, and we were putting the film up on campus. And I thought, if the president were to see this, it would give her a lot of perspective on what happened. And so I reached out to her. He was told she would be out of town.
You're seeing the case built of her increasing incompetence and immorality.
And couldn't see it. And then I reached out to her again. Said, look, I'll facilitate your attendance in the Congress. Come see the film. I'll fly you down. That was rejected. and then she testified. And I watched, a good percentage, 80% of the testimony of all three presidents, and it was an embarrassment to the country, embarrassment to the universities. They were evasive. They didn't answer questions. They were rude. They smirked. They were disrespectful to our Congress.
I've talked about this a lot, but it takes a narcissistic personality to be staunchly on the left, because to be on the left means you insist that everything is socially constructed and there are no objective aspects to reality, which means that they think that reality should be constructed in the image of their ideology. That obviously takes a tremendous level of narcissism.
Let me be, kind of clear. What if protesters are calling for genocide for the Jews? Does that violate your rules on bullying and harassment? And the three of them,
it was a clever question.
They gave the same answer. It depends on the context. And not until they actually executed it on the genocide does the university have the right to intervene.
What does free speech in college campuses look like?
Harvard has become a place where free speech is not tolerated on campus, or at least free speech that's not part of the accepted dialogue or this.
Okay, there it is.
Into free expression. First of all, I never threatened to use financial or other resources. The only thing I did here was I wrote public letters. I spoke privately to a couple members of the board. I spoke for 45 minutes to the chairman. None of those conversations were effective or went anywhere, as far as I could tell. I think my public letters and then some of the posts I did,
tweets, yeah,
and that act, it was really the words. I think I was disappointed. After the congressional testimony, the board of Harvard said that they were 100% behind, unanimously 100% behind President Gay. And so clearly I was ineffective. And ultimately what took her down was other, I would say, activists who identified issues with academic integrity.
Despite the fact that she blatantly ignored morality, despite that she blatantly ignored Harvard's own policies, he just confirmed that the board was behind her. Didn't see any problems with that disastrous testimony that the entire country could tell was nothing but an entire train wreck. So that means that they're willing to lie about what their eyes tell them. We're talking about the board of Harvard, the people that pull the levers of power at Harvard, faculty. They refuse to acknowledge reality. But why is that? He's about to tell you.
And then she lost the confidence of the faculty. And once that happens, it's hard to stay. I wanted her to be fired, basically, or be forced to resign because of failures of leadership, because that would have sent a message about the importance of leadership. Failure to stop a emergence of anti-Semitism on campus. And
Harvard isn't interested in leadership. They're interested in something else. What could that be?
She said, does calling for genocide against the Jews violate your free speech policy? She says, does calling for genocide against the Jews violate your policies on bullying and harassment? And I think everyone looked at this when they said, it depends on the context. And they said, look, if you replace Jews with some other ethnic group, students who've used the N-word, for example, have been thrown off campus or suspended. Students who've hate speech directed at LGBTQ people has led to disciplinary action. Attacking, spitting on
establishing ideological bias.
Jewish students, or kind of roughing them up a bit. Seemed like or calling for
right. It's championing against the oppressors, because in Marxism they only distinguish between oppressors and oppressees. Victimhood is what gives a person their virtue, according to these people. It is a perverse ideology. It's wrong. It's evil. But that's how they operate. Still, you might be asking yourself, where's the proof that they're Marxists?
October 7th, the event that woke me up was 30 student organizations came out with a public letter on October 8th.
The day after a genocide happened, the day after an event that the globe got to recognize is objectively wrong. The leading academic institute that hypothetically holds the best minds of our nation came out to say, we deny the existence of objective moral frameworks. That is what you're doing. That is the admission you're making when you say that Israel is at fault for their own genocide.
Literally the morning after this letter was created, and said, Israel is solely responsible for Hamas's violent acts.
Madness. It is madness. So you're seeing, okay, people are clearly possessed by an ideology to the point where they are willing to sign a letter expressing madness, insanity, a disconnection from reality. That passes the point of, opinion. That is complete madness. And it's also completely antithetical to the left-wing position, at least hypothetically, by the way. Can you imagine, let's say someone is assaulted in a certain type of way, and then people come out to sign a letter saying it was her fault?
Again, Israel had not even mounted a defense at this point, and there were still terrorists running around in the southern part of Israel.
On October 8th.
And I'm like, Harvard students, 34 Harvard student organizations signed this letter. And I'm like, what is going on?
Solidarity in the madness. So they're clear. They have a need to express solidarity in the reality denial, strength in numbers. Okay, we know that we look insane. We know that what we're doing is blatantly immoral, but we are going to stand together and say that we are willing to be blatantly immoral. What could cause them to do that?
WTF, right? And I started talking to the faculty.
Clearly something's seriously wrong and broken at this point.
That's when I started hearing about, actually, Bill, it's this DEI ideology. I'm like, what?
Boom! What have I been talking about since the inception of this channel, obviously, but also in that video where I analyzed their testimony before Congress. What does DEI, the Marxist ideology, have to do with Harvard students failing to condemn genocide the day after it takes place? Marxism requires people to denounce all objective frameworks, including morality, including all sense-making apparatuses like logic, reason, rationality, and it says that those things are oppressive. In its alignment with postmodernist ideology, so postmodern neo-Marxism. In that ideology, it says there are no better and worse ways of interpreting the world. And so even when it makes them look insane, even when it makes them look beyond delusional, even when it throws all of their credibility out the window and exposes them as the lunatics that they are required in Marxist ideology, which grants them in their mind all of their virtue, to say, we will deny objective reality, we will deny morality, because we're narcissistic enough to believe that our ideology gives us truth and virtue. And here you see a very rare instance where those claims are so starkly contrasted to the point of being ridiculous, because they're pretending to be good people professing truth while saying that the group of people that were genocided, it was their fault. You rarely get an instance where it is so grave, where the error is so grave and the delusion is so grave, so narcissistic, so disgusting and evil. But it is precisely because the opportunity was that serious that they had to sign that petition. They had to sign those letters. Because again, what did I say at the beginning of the video? The worst fear of the radical leftists is being seen as a fraud. And in that moment, the radical left was being undermined by the fact that everyone was engaging in an objective moral framework, condemning terrorism. This is the reason why recently you've seen leftists supporting terrorists. Leftist streamers bringing on terrorists to their stream. Leftists on TikTok praising Osama bin Laden. The reason for this is because stark examples of pure evil bring out an acknowledgement from civilization that objective morality is real, and that is intolerable to the radical left-wing ideology of Marxism, which is DEI. Marxism is the ideology from which DEI emerges, the equity and inclusivity. It's all counterfeit.
City, equity, inclusion. Obviously I'm familiar with these words, and I see this in the corporate context. And they say, yeah, and they started talking to me about this oppressed.
It must be so confusing to someone who doesn't know what's going on. Why are they talking about oppressor versus oppressee when they're failing to condemn genocide? It's because they have replaced true virtue, true merit with their dogmatic, broken, reprehensible ideology. And they're calling themselves good people while doing it. They're willing to do the equivalent of saying the earth is flat and then smile at you as they think that they're objectively correct and you're not only wrong, but you're an evil oppressor. It's the inversion of truth. That's exactly what's going on here.
Which is effectively taught on campus. And
the acknowledgement that DEI is taught on campus. It's not a conspiracy theory. It was just acknowledged by a guy that's plugged in, went to Harvard, knows about it, talks to people, knew the president, knows the board. DEI Marxism is being taught at Harvard.
Represents the backdrop for many of the courses that are offered and the various...
It defines their curriculums. The ideology that killed 6 times more people than Hitler.
Studies and other degree offerings. I'm like, I had not even heard of this. And, I'm a pretty aware person. But I was...
It can't be tolerated.
Completely unaware. And basically, they're like, look, Israel is deemed an oppressor, and the Palestinians are deemed the oppressed, and you take the side of the oppressed. And
that's why it's so stark. That's why their ideology got completely broken and crumpled as a result of this. Everyone gets to see that they're frauds, but not enough people are recognizing that this is directly as a result of Marxism. This is directly as a result of this left-wing mental ideological corruption going on in these campuses. They failed to condemn the victims of genocide because their ideology tells them that the victims of genocide are oppressors. Victims of the genocide are oppressors. So the ideology is self-contradictory, it's incoherent, but it wasn't built to be coherent because it's conjoined with postmodernism, which says there's no better and worse ways of interpreting reality, and objective truth is oppressive in and of itself. The debauchery, the mental brokenness of the left is more complex to understand than right-wing totalitarianism, but it is actually far more dangerous.
Any acts of the oppressed to dislodge the oppressor, regardless of how vile or barbaric, are okay.
And there you have the admission of their evil, the admission of their immorality and complete madness, their incoherence. The list goes on. I mean, I could use 20 words to describe their barbarism. But at the end of it, they would still deny the existence of objective moral frameworks, saying, who are you to hold us accountable? There's no such thing as truth. There's no such thing as logic. As a matter of fact, the only truth that there is our ideology. The only truth that there is you're a bad person for not agreeing with us. Therefore, we will not contend with what you have to say. This is the most dangerous ideology humanity has ever derived. This is an existential threat to the planet, and it's infected even the highest institutions of learning.
Okay, this is a super dangerous ideology. And so I wrote a questioning post about this. Like, here's what I'm hearing. Is this right? Then I had a friend of mine sent me Christopher Rufo's book, America's Cultural Revolution, sociological study of the origins of the DEI movement and critical race theory. And I found it actually...
Critical race theory is racism and it's Marxism.
One of the more important books I've read, and also I found it quite concerning. Ultimately, DEI comes out of a kind of a Marxist, socialist backdrop, way to look at the world.
Resentment, unfathomable resentment.
And so I think there are a lot of issues with it, but
calling them out is what they fear.
Fortunately, it's advancing. I ultimately concluded racism as opposed to fighting it, which is what I thought.
Right. Well, they invert truth. That is a central tenet of the left-wing position because, again, when combined with postmodernism, they say that objective truth is nothing more than oppression. That's why you get the most unbelievably incoherent positions from left-wing ideology, and also why it's incredibly evil.
And Harvard faculty were telling me that, there's really is no such thing as free speech on campus. And that, there was a survey done, a year or so ago, of the Harvard faculty, and only 2% of the faculty admitted, even in an anonymous survey, admitted to having a conservative point of view. So we have a campus that's 98% non-conservative, liberal, progressive, that's adopted this DEI construct.
Marxism.
And then I learned from a member of the search committee for the Harvard president that they were restricted in looking at candidates, only those who met the DEI office's criteria.
They're restricted in their hiring at Harvard based on people's skin color. The left is literally discriminating based on skin color. The left is literally racist. They hate meritocracy because meritocracy requires an individual identity. It requires you take responsibility for your life. It requires that you compete, which requires sets of coherent frameworks. Meritocracy is demonized. Oh, wait a second. In socialism, meritocracy is demonized because they demonize capitalism. That's interesting.
Yeah, and I shared this in one of my postings, and I was accused of being a racist.
That is their only defense. Oh, he's white. He's a man. His opinions must not be worth listening to. Again, you see the architecture of their brutally ugly, broken, evil ideology coming to the forefront. Architecture is deliberately designed by the leftist ideology. We're going to conclude this video with the capstone, the embodiment, the face of incompetent DEI, narcissistic, counterfeit virtue itself.
The president of Harvard resigned over plagiarism, not over the thing that you were initially troubled by.
You're looking at the face of incompetence. You're looking at the face of ultimate narcissism. She thinks that she should be in her position because of her skin color, because of what she thinks.
It's hard to really know, right? It's not like a provable fact. I would say as...
The left worships incompetence, by the way.
At a certain point in time, she lost the confidence of the faculty, and that was ultimately the catalyst. And whether that was How much of that was the plagiarism issue and how much of that was some of the things that preceded it? Or was it all of these issues in their entirety? There's no way to do a calculus.
Explain the nature of this plagiarism from what you remember.
So Aaron Sabarium and Christopher Rufo, one from the Free Beacon, and Chris, surfaced some allegations on or identified some plagiarism issues that that I would say the initial examples were
Competent white student realizes the president of his elite institution is a fraud.
Use of the same words with proper attribution, some missing footnotes, and then over time, with I guess more digging, they released I think ultimately something like 76 examples of what they call plagiarism in I think 8 of 11 of her articles. And one of the other things that came forth here is, as president of the university, she had sort of the thinnest transcript academically of any previous president.
Dude, oh no! That tiny little statement they'll find so enraging because it is acknowledging that they are incompetent. It's acknowledging that they're frauds. Guys, this woman, this DEI hire, not only was an academic cheat, not only is incompetent, oh, that enrages their identity politic minds, by the way. But not only did she commit plagiarism because she's not intelligent, her very qualifications were inferior to every other president in the college's history, and she was still hired, confirming that she is a DEI hire, confirming that she's incompetent. And you might say, an easily inflamed emotional leftist would say, how do you know she's incompetent? Because she plagiarizes, and we have the proof of it. Get destroyed. And they're infuriated because every time they get revealed as frauds, they lose people permanently. They lose people to the sense-making apparatuses of logic, reason, as well as the individual identity, as well as meritocracy. The list goes on.
Very small, relatively small body of work. And then when you couple that with the amount of...
Oh, and for a white billionaire man to be saying, relatively small body of work, incompetent, 76 instances of plagiarism, their minds are melting.
Plagiarism that was pervasive. And then I guess some of the other examples that surfaced were not missing quotation marks, where the authors of the work felt that their ideas had been stolen. And really, plagiarism is academic fraud. If a leader fails as a leader, and that's the reason for their resignation or dismissal.
Right, not academic incompetence or negligence. But Harvard's actually making a statement because they're still riddled with Marxists. They're still riddled with people that are extraordinarily resentful and find objective truth abhorrent. They're making a statement saying, we refuse to exercise objective moral frameworks even when forced to by Congress itself, even when we are seen by everyone as massive failures.
Then she gets, if you will, caught on a technical violation that had nothing to do with failed leadership.
Right, imagine if you're watching a football game, the players are on the field, they're in the middle of the play, and then one guy pulls out a dagger and then just stabs another guy. The game stops, everyone's like, oh my gosh, what's going on here? Days later, after a court of law, after the referees look at the footage, they say, we're gonna throw this guy off the team, but it's because his jersey was untucked. After we looked at the footage, it turned out we discovered his jersey was untucked. The other guy is like lying on the ground, after being stabbed. And they're like, yeah, his jersey was untucked. We're going to have to kick him off the team. They don't want to acknowledge the objective parameters that hold them accountable because their ideology of Marxism denies objective parameters.